Where does freedom of speech end and where does hate speech begin? It turns out there's not broad consensus on what the answer to this question is, but we hope to find out soon. This was especially a big story recently when the appeal in the Shelley Garland matter was heard. So broadly speaking, this is what happened. A white man with the name of Roets wrote an article under the pseudonym Shelley Garland, and he sent it to Huffington Post, South Africa, for publication. In the article, he argued that some of the biggest blows to the progressive cause recently have been due to the votes of white men. He blamed white men for Brexit, for the election of Donald Trump, for the DA governing in 3 cities, and virtually every horrible thing that you can think of. It was then argued that in the past 500 years, white men should be blamed for colonialism, slavery, and genocide. And the conclusion is that white men have way too much assets which have to be redistributed. In other words, the stuff that white men own must be taken from them and redistributed among people who are not white and not men. Essentially, the conclusion then is that white men must be deprived of their voting rights so that the power balance can be restored. This article was published on Huffington Post South Africa and shared more than 55,000 times, resulting in a severe backlash not only from within South Africa but from the international community. The editor of Huffington Post South Africa, Varashni Pillay, then responded to criticism by doubling down on the content of the article, saying that it is standard feminist theory and that the arguments put forth are, in her view, glaringly obvious. AfriForum filed a complaint with the press ombudsman, who unfortunately for him seems to be a white man, who found the article to be hate speech. Varashni Pillay then resigned as editor of Huffington Post South Africa and appealed the finding in her personal capacity. So this matter was debated recently at the Press Ombudsman's Appeals Committee, and it got very interesting. Why is this important? It's important because we must have clarity on the balance between freedom of expression on the one side and hate speech on the other. The South African Constitution says that the right to freedom of expression does not extend to propaganda for war, incitement to violence, or advocacy of hatred that is based on race, ethnicity, gender, or religion, and that constitutes incitement to cause harm. There are, of course, other references to hate speech, such as in the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act and the Press Code, which is, of course, a document that was scrutinized at this hearing. Let's first look at AfriForum's view. AfriForum believes in the marketplace of ideas, which means that you must be able to go to this so-called marketplace and get new ideas that you have not been exposed to earlier. Your alleged right not to be offended does not trump my right to freedom of speech. And in an open society and a healthy democracy, it requires of you to be offended from time to time, because it exposes you to views that you might not have been aware of earlier. Also, this is good for you because it forces you to defend your views, which, if your views are correct, makes your argument even stronger. AfriForum generally believes in more freedom and less regulation. We believe that the role of government is to protect its people and not to regulate the way in which they interact with each other. Secondly, we need to differentiate between Roets' article and Varashni Pillay's response to this article. Shortly after the publication of this piece, Roets came out explaining that he actually wrote the article under a pseudonym and why he did so. He said, "The hoax article, entitled 'Could it be time to deny white men the vote?' written under the pseudonym Shelley Garland that I managed to have published by HuffPost, is both illustrative and instructive in this regard. It shows how easy, at least in the case of the Huffington Post, it is to get away with propounding a view that bolsters the prevailing echo chamber, replete with false statistics and fabricated data, and reinforces a particular ideological worldview. This incident has shown that editorial practices are often sacrificed in the relentless search for clicks. I hope this incident leads to stronger journalism and fact-checking, although I do not think it is necessarily an issue restricted to journalism alone." Pillay, on the other hand, endorsed the article, claiming that it's standard feminist theory and glaringly obvious. When we're talking about hate speech, we need to be context sensitive. So what Roets did was not hate speech, what Pillay did was. It's like Joseph Goebbels reading an article by Adolf Hitler in which it is claimed that Jews are subhuman and they need to be exterminated, and then saying, "I agree with this view," only to find out that it was an article not written by Adolf Hitler but by Charlie Chaplin in a way to mock the Nazis. In that case, Chaplin would not be guilty of hate speech, but Goebbels would be. Thirdly, this is not a call for the protection or the promotion of one group. It's a call for the oppression and the punishment of another group. In the fourth place, the progressive and the liberal argument has always been that nothing is more important than the right to vote. And of course, this is probably true. If suddenly, when we're talking about depriving white people of the right to vote, and we say, no, let's have a debate about whether this is hate speech or not, it really puts a big question mark over the ANC's entire struggle during the 80s and early 90s. And in the fifth place, AfriForum's main issue with this case is essentially about consistency. We cannot have double standards in the way in which we interpret hate speech. As AfriForum, we can live with the finding that this article is not hate speech, and we will even support that if it is applied consistently. Firstly, the content of the article is false, but let's, for the sake of the argument, accept it to be true. Would it be hate speech if we were to argue that black people gave Idi Amin his power, that black people committed genocide in Rwanda, and that black people voted for Jacob Zuma, and as a result, black people should be deprived of their right to vote? This would of course be hate speech, and there would not even be a debate about this. When Penny Sparrow said that black people who litter on the Durban beachfront are monkeys, it was broadly accepted that it was hate speech. When we are, however, saying that white people should be deprived of the right to vote, we have to have a debate about whether it is hate speech or not. This hearing was essentially a hearing about white privilege. It was argued that the content of the article is true, which is of course not true, and it was argued that there are certain patterns of discrimination, that white people have too much power, white men in particular have too much power, and that white people are in fact responsible for slavery, which is of course factually incorrect. It was even said that of course white men are targeted. They have to be targeted because they have disproportionate power. So here's the point. Were whites the only ones who committed atrocities? No. Did whites commit atrocities? Yes. It is argued, however, that white people did atrocious things and therefore should be punished as a community by depriving them of their right to vote. This is called collective guilt. We have to be able to stomach things that we disagree with, and we must do so consistently, without double standards. If it's not hate speech to tell a black person that he or she is a monkey, but it's hate speech to blame white people for slavery and genocide and call for their voting rights to be scrapped, we as a society have a very serious problem. So what did we see at this appeals committee? We had two white men, one appearing for Varashni Pillay and one appearing for Media Monitoring Africa and SANEF, arguing about how horrible the finding of another white man was on the extent of the horrors committed by white men. Fortunately, there was a fourth white man in the room, appearing for AfriForum, who brought a sense of rationality to the table. When we endorse double standards, we are effectively entrenching second-class citizenship. My name is Ernst, and this is your fact sheet.